In this video, I paint a render and a rancor. Actually, they are both renders, gray renders. But the render looks like a rancor, and you never know when you'll need a rancor instead of a render, so what you do is you turn one render into a rancor, and now you've got your bases covered, although you have to make sure you neglect neither the render nor the rancor, because then the render becomes rancorous, and the rancor, well, let's be honest, the rancor was already filled with rancor, but more rancor in the rancor would be bad. The point is, I have a render and a rancor, but they're both actually renders, and they have both become filled with rancor. Help me. Help me. Good day or night to you, and welcome to the Gaming Tome. Recently, I picked up a really cool miniature, the Gray Render from WizKids. Specifically, this is the version from Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures, their unpainted D&D model line. As I was admiring the details getting ready to paint it, I had a realization. This beast looks familiar. It shares a lot of similar features to the Rancor from Star Wars. So naturally, I painted the model twice. I painted the first one like a gray render, and the second one got a color scheme inspired by the Rancor. I had a blast painting these two models. In this video, I will share the entire process of painting these two behemoths and detailing their bases. Let the crafting begin! Before the painting can begin, there are some bits of flashing that need to be cleaned up. I usually do not worry much about flashing, but these models are big, so flashing is more noticeable, but also easier to deal with. Some shallow cuts and scrapes with a hobby knife do the trick. Next, I would prime the models if they were not already primed. That is one thing I really like about the unpainted miniatures from WizKids. They are sold pre-primed. Saves me a step. I love it. It is not only convenient, but it also makes for a nice example of what a spray-primed miniature should look like. This was helpful for me when learning to prime miniatures by airbrush. Both miniatures start with a base coat. The gray render gets a coat of solid dark gray. In hindsight, I could have saved time by giving that stone slab base a coat of the same color. The base coat for the Rancor is Citadel's Mournfang Brown. This is actually one of my favorite colors of miniature paint. It is a vivid orange brown, useful for leather, fur, and sometimes naturally colored cloth. Next comes a heavy dry brush. I used a light gray to highlight the skin of the render and a taupe for the Rancor. The dry brushing brings out so much detail. The intricate texturing of the model's thick hide is already showing. The skin resembles that of an elephant or rhinoceros, but there are parts that remind me of the loose skin of a large lizard as well. Most of the body is done for now. It is time to focus in on the finer details. The mouth is a good place to add contrast to the model. A coat of warm peach complements the otherwise cold grays of the render. The Rancor gets a warmer shade of the same color. It provides less contrast, but just feels right with the overall brown theme. I made similar choices when painting the eyes. I chose a yellow for the render and then touched it up later with an even brighter yellow, because I wanted the eyes to stand out. The Rancor, however, gets solid black eyes because, I don't know, I think they look more primal. Side note, the head is quite alien. The 6 eyes painted black could be interpreted as nostrils. That interpretation would make for an interesting new creature. A big behemoth that is blind but can smell you. Did you take a bath? Because if you didn't, this giant monster, he's gonna sniff you down and he's gonna smash your house. That's what something like this does. It smashes your house and eats your cattle or something. Happens every time. Moving on. I chose black for the teeth and nails of the render to match the 5th edition D&D artwork. This is not as outlandish of a color choice as I initially thought. Some animals, sea lions for example, actually have black teeth. Weird, but also cool, I guess. The Rancor, on the other hand, gets a natural beige set of teeth and nails. The model's long fingers and knobby knuckles are another similarity between the gray render and the Rancor. I mixed together a mauve color for the tongues of the models. It is subtle, but I like it. This addition of color completes the mouths. Before moving forward on painting the stone slab base detail, I decided to look at the provided plastic bases. This miniature is large and beautifully detailed. It deserves a proper base. I opted for a larger 60mm wargaming base. More and more I find myself putting D&D miniatures on bumpy, uneven terrain where wargaming bases are better suited. The hollow underside grips bumps on the surface, making the model more stable. The provided bases do have a subtle lip underneath, but I'm not confident it would stop this chunky piece of plastic from sliding down a sloped surface. Also, the larger base size gives me more space to decorate. I could not proceed with painting until the ground was textured. I scooped myself some gray grout, poured in some water, and started mixing. I spread this paste over the top of the base around the stone slab, trying to blend into it. I added less water to the grout for the first model, which made for a thicker, grainy ground texture. The Rancor will have a sandy desert base. The addition of extra water made the grout smooth to simulate a scaled-down, fine sand or clay ground cover. For extra inorganic details, I dotted some PVA glue on the wet grout and then gently pushed in some chipped pebbles. I was not sure how well the grout would grip the pebbles. The glue was an added precaution, and it seemed to work. 12 hours later, the grout had dried and I could get back to work. The render's base will be a temperate theme of dirt, stone, and grass. I painted the grout brown and base coated the stones and the large slab dark gray. A pinkish red sandstone desert came to mind for the Rancor's base. I mixed a salmon color using red, peach, and pastel orange. This ended up being a base coat for all the ground details. I added some orange to most of the small rocks and a redder salmon to the remaining stones and the large slab. Once that dried, I applied the washes. The render was simple, a black-brown wash for the whole thing. I like how the wash adds a slight dirty tint to the highlights of the gray render's hide. I used a black-brown wash again for the body of the Rancor, but tried lighter washes for the desert base. I started with a sepia wash. That was too dirty. Next, I tried a black wash. That was too cold. I mixed the two washes together and the resulting color was satisfactory. After the wash dried, it was time to bring back the highlights from earlier with more dry brushing. Once again, I used gray on the render and taupe on the Rancor. The dry brushing was heavy the first time, but this time around, it needed to be lighter. There will not be another wash to tone down this color. The highlights need to be just enough, but no more. I extended the gray dry brushing to those stone details on the render's base. A follow-up dusting of taupe turns out to be suitable for highlighting dirt. I used a pastel orange to highlight the Rancor's desert base. This added a nice dusty finish to the whole surface. Part of me wishes I went a little further on the highlights of this base, but I am more afraid of ruining it. These bases could do for some foliage. I found a roll of jute twine in the garage. It turns out this stuff can be made into miniature grass tufts. I used PVA glue to attach some snippets of the twine to a piece of chipboard. The glue helps bind one end together tightly, allowing the strands on the other end to be spread apart. It also helps with attaching the tufts to the base later on. After the unglued end of the twine had been opened, I removed the tufts from the chipboard and stained them with washes and watered down paint before supergluing them to their respective bases. I made 2 dead brown grass tufts for the desert base and 3 greenish tufts for the temperate base. The render could use a little more green around his feet. A scattered brushing of slightly thin PVA glue here and there, followed by a sprinkling of homemade flocking, did the trick. I later brushed away any loose flecks and then sealed the attached flock in place with drops of PVA. And with that, the models are done. Actually, they still need to be varnished. It would have been easier if I had varnished them before adding all that foliage. Oh, God damn it. Why? Oh! I'm very happy with the results. The paint job and basing turned out wonderful. Even better, it was not difficult to paint. Simple dry brush highlights are doing the heavy lifting here. I'm especially proud of the basing on the Rancor themed model. This was a new color scheme for me, but I think I nailed that pinkish red sandstone aesthetic. As pleased as I am with my work painting the minis, it really is the sculpts, though, that make these models look great. I think this is the best iteration of the gray render in miniature form. It has an awesome shape. I like that hulking humanoid form with that creepy alien head. It has nice proportions. There are no parts of the body that feel too big or too small. The beast as a whole, it's impressive in size next to 28mm heroes. For comparison, this model is really close in size to the Mordor troll from the Middle-earth strategy battle game. The best part of this model is the detail. The creature is covered in fine texturing from head to toe. The skin has all these nice wrinkles and creases. The neck has all these folds in the skin. It looks so good. I love it. I don't think I'm quite done with this model. I might have to return to it in a future video for some kit bashing. It's just too good. Now, what is the gray render mini useful for? Well, the model was meant for Dungeons & Dragons, so of course it would fit in with tabletop role-playing games in a fantasy setting. I could also see it finding use in fantasy wargaming as some sort of troll or giant, but the head might be a little too alien. On that note, the bizarre six-eyed head makes this creature feel right at home in futuristic miniature games as an alien behemoth. This model would be an easy proxy for a Star Wars miniature game. Just have it be a Rancor, although the scale might not be right. This might be a young Rancor, not a child, but a youthful Rancor. Perhaps a belligerent teenage Rancor. Darn those street youth Rancors, they're running around vandalizing the place, breaking through walls and scratching things up with their claws and eating my customers. I have a theory that the gray render was inspired by the Rancor. Visually, they share striking similarities. The body type, the long knobby fingers, the forward head posture like it's been on its smartphone too long. Although I must mention, the Rancor has a much differently shaped head and longer arms. There are some behavioral similarities though. Both hulking creatures are capable of entering mindless destructive rampages. They are also capable of forming strong emotional attachments with other creatures. In Star Wars, domesticated Rancors are known to form loving bonds with their owners. In Dungeons & Dragons lore, gray renders often form a protective, caring bond with other creatures. These two beasts are similar, but there's only one way to know if my theory is correct. Ancient astronaut theorists. Was the gray render inspired by the Rancor?
Ancient astronaut theorists say yes.
They did it! They did the thing! They said the thing! I hereby proclaim the render to be the Rancor of D&D. Let's go! I have a theory, unless it's invalidated in the comments. In which case, I don't have a theory. That was a joke. What are you talking about? Not my theory. That was someone else's.